I want to tell the story of the miracles that happened around the time that my son died. And you wouldn't necessarily think, oh, there's miracles with this, but in actuality there were. So my son had epilepsy his entire life, and from that he'd sustained a lot of brain damage. He also had autism, and he just really, really struggled. And just before he turned 20, he got really, really sick, and that sickness actually led to him passing away. But there were so many miracles that happened with it, so I'll just kind of tell a few of them. One of them of the ones that happened was, so because of his epilepsy, he took a lot of medications, and those medications leached the calcium from his bones, and he had osteoporosis at 19 years old. And about 2 weeks before he died, it was about a week before Christmas, he got super sick with the flu. Like, I've never seen anybody so sick, and he didn't eat or drink for about 5 days and got super, super weak. And during that time, we were in a house that had a split level, and the stairs were wooden. And as he was, and he got, because he was so weak, we didn't let him try to navigate those stairs by himself. But one time he got away from us and was walking up the stairs just as I walked in the door, and he had made it to, this, split levels are like this, and he'd made it up and almost to the top of the second flight when he got wobbly and overbalanced, and he went right over the staircase. Right over what are those things called? The banister, and fell 10 feet down onto the stairs below. And what was miraculous about that is that even though a few months earlier he'd had a seizure and had broken 2 bones in his foot, this time, even though he came straight down on his hip and on these stairs, even though he got a huge bruise, he did not break anything, which was miraculous. And then a couple of weeks later, he had a seizure during the night, which often happens. And usually he would sleep for several hours afterwards, and like 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning, he'd finally get up. Well, this particular time, he got up and went downstairs to our bedroom. Our bedroom was down in the basement, and we had our own bathroom down there, and he liked to shower down there. And he had gotten up and gone downstairs to get in the shower. And that right there was a miracle, because he actually had a seizure in the shower. He didn't come out of that seizure. We actually had to pull him out, and he had another seizure and another seizure. He had about 3 or 4 in a row. And then my husband said, "Kelley, you need to call the ambulance." And I said, "We haven't called the ambulance for just a seizure in over a decade." And he said, "You need to call this time." Well, we did. And the EMTs got there, and he stopped seizing, and they got him all loaded up into the ambulance, and got him on the way to the hospital. He went into a cardiac arrest and was in that cardiac arrest for about 15 minutes. They finally got him stabilized, got him to the hospital. If he had not gotten up, if he had continued to sleep like he usually did, he would have died in our house, and I would have found him later. And I didn't, because God got him up and took him down to take a shower, and it saved us from that trauma. Another thing was that Josh got hurt a lot. And it had gotten to the point about 2 years before he died, the Spirit let me know that his life was going to be short, and that his mortality was fragile. And a few months after that experience, he had a seizure. He hit his head really badly. And by the time I got to where he was at a basketball court, and some friends called me and said, "You need to come." By the time I got there, head wounds bleed like nothing else. And it had swollen badly, and then he just bled through. This guy was holding a coat to his head, and it just was bleeding through everything. And it looked for all the world like he had bashed the side of his head in. And I totally lost it. I thought, he's dead. It's gone. He actually just needed stitches, and he was fine. But in that moment, I started praying and saying, "God, I'll pick up the pieces. I'll be covered in his blood. I just don't want to see the accident that takes his life." And the miracle with the ambulance was that I had learned long ago that if you ride in the ambulance, you don't have a ride home from the hospital. So I never rode in the ambulance anymore, and I would take my own car and I'd meet them there. And I was not in the ambulance when Josh had that cardiac arrest. I actually saw the ambulance on the side of the street, and I thought, wow, somebody else is having a bad day. And I kept on driving because I had left just a few minutes later than they had. And it was such a miracle that I was not there. Other miracles that happened, he was in the hospital for about 36 hours. He went into the ICU. They chilled his body down to try to save his brain, because being without oxygen, his brain was going to swell. And they just discovered that there's a better prognosis if you chill the brain and let it kind of not swell so much. And they did that, but his body started shutting down. And in the middle of the night, they called us and said, hey, you need to come into the hospital. He's probably not going to make it much longer. And we did. And we got into the hospital, and they said, he's already maxed out on 4 different blood pressure medications. We've got him on the next level down from being maxed out on the 5th. The 5th is the creme de la creme. It's the best of the best. His body is cold but we have to raise the temperature so that we can see what's going on with the brain, so we can see if there's anything there anymore. Okay. He said, but as the body warms up, when the body is cold, everything contracts. Blood vessels contract, tissue contracts. I'm sure you've noticed that when your hands get cold, your rings start flipping around and everything contracts. But as the temperature goes up, the blood vessels will expand. He was already maxed out on 4 medications, almost maxed out on a 5th. And he said, when the body expands, he will go into cardiac arrest. What do you want us to do? They said, well, we asked, my husband and I asked, what are the options? And he said, well, we'll jump up on the bed and we'll start giving him chest compressions, and it'll break his ribs and it'll break his sternum. And my husband and I looked at each other and said, absolutely not. No way. And so we had our other kids in the waiting room outside the ICU. It was like 3 a.m. They were so tired, trying to sleep. But we met as a family and we talked, and we said, this is what's happening. This is where it's going. We need to decide as a family what to do. And without even looking at each other or anybody, our kids all came to the same conclusion and said, yeah, we need to let him go. And it was just this beautiful, and friends. Oh, and in the next few hours before our son actually passed away, friends just started pouring in. And the ICU was only letting like 2 or 3 people back at a time, but they let everybody come. And it wasn't all at once, but I mean, I'm talking so many people came to say goodbye to Josh. And my mother-in-law was able to get a ticket from Utah to Kansas City, and she came in like 3 hours before Josh died, and so she was able to say goodbye. And there were so many miracles that happened even as we were losing our son. And it felt like in the day of him passing away, and then in the several weeks afterwards, not just as we were getting ready for the funeral, but even after, it was like the miracles just piled up. God knew that we needed help. He sent us people who could support us and guide us and help us, and we found that Josh had touched many more people than we had any idea of. And it was so beautiful to see the way that he had impacted so many. And it was a beautiful thing. So yeah, miracles.